Onye had been married to David for 15 years. Their love had been unwavering, a beacon in the stormy seas of life. However, a cloud had cast a shadow over their happiness. They had been unable to conceive a child.
Welcome to VC's True Life Stories and African Folk Tales. Pick up your popcorn, let's learn and enjoy this story together. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting and educative videos. Thank you.
Onye's mother-in-law, Mrs. Daniels, had become increasingly pressuring, her demands growing louder with each passing year. She would often remind Onye of her duty as a wife, insisting that her inability to bear a child was a personal failure. Onye's heart ached with each visit from Mrs. Daniels. The woman's words, though felt empty, but were with judgment. Anytime Mr. Daniel visits their home, Onye would move to her friend's house, seeking comfort and understanding because the pressure was getting out of hand. David, ever supportive, would try to protect his wife from his mother's constant pressure, but his efforts were often in vain. One day, Mrs. Daniels, driven by her desire for a grandchild, began to suggest unconventional solutions. She proposed that David should consider impregnating another woman, and then bring the child into their family. She even brought girls to her son's matrimonial home, so that he can impregnate anyone he wants. David was horrified by the idea. He loved Onye deeply and could not think of hurting her in any way. Onye, on the other hand, was devastated. The thought of David fathering a child with someone else was unbearable. She felt a surge of anger and disappointment towards her mother-in-law, whose constant pressure is pushing her family to the wall. Desperate and alone, Onye began to contemplate leaving her marriage. One evening, as Onye was returning from the market, she heard a faint cry coming from a nearby bush. She was curious at first, but she decided to continue with her journey. After a few steps, her curiosity and concern for the cry increased. She decided to approach the source of the sound. To her surprise, she saw two newborn babies, a boy and a girl, lying in baskets. The infants were fragile and shivering. Their cries increased and filled the environment with desperation. Onye's heart raced. She knew she had to help the babies. Without hesitation, she picked up her phone and called her husband, who rushed in almost immediately. David was stunned when she arrived. Onye explained everything that happened, her voice trembling with emotion. And they picked up the baskets and rushed home. Together, they decided to care for the abandoned infants. David and Onye knew they couldn't keep the babies without people finding out that they were adopted, and if they decide to hide them, the babies can't be hidden forever. Mrs. Daniels would eventually discover them, and the consequences would be embarrassing to Onye because she just wanted her own children to avoid mockery. But, after much deliberation, they came up with a plan. Onye would pretend to be pregnant, traveling to a nearby village to give birth. And upon her return, she would present the babies as her own. The plan was risky, but it was their only hope. So, Onye left for the village that evening to a nearby village. Her heart was heavy with mixed emotions. She hoped that her mother-in-law would believe her deception and that the babies would find a loving home. Months passed, and Onye's pregnancy seemed to be progressing normally. Everyone in the neighborhood has heard about the good news. Mrs. Daniels, on the other hand, became impatient, her questions about Onye's due date becoming more frequent. Onye would fake discomfort and exhaustion anytime her mother-in-law calls. She was doing her best to maintain the assumption of being pregnant. Finally, Onye returned home after 9 months and few weeks. She brought the babies with her, presenting them to everyone that came to welcome her and Mrs. Daniels as her long-awaited grandchildren. The older woman was overjoyed, her eyes filled with tears of happiness. She couldn't believe that Onye had finally given birth after so many years of trying. But, after a few days of staying with them, Mrs. Daniels' joy became soured. She began to notice something strange about the babies. They seemed older than they should have been. When she confronted Onye and David, They insisted that Onye actually went to the nearby village to give birth, not to nurture pregnancy. They told her that they wanted to surprise her. That was why they hid the pregnancy and allowed the children to stay for 9 months in the nearby village before coming home to make the surprise more interesting. Mrs. Daniels pretended to accept their so-called surprise but remained unconvinced, her suspicions growing stronger with each passing day. Onye and David, on the other hand, loved their babies, whom they named Daniel and Danielle. They took care of the children with love and happiness. Onye was filled with happiness and fulfillment. Daniel and Danielle grew so rapidly. They were brilliant, smart and intelligent. Mrs. Daniel's suspense increases anytime she visits her son's home. She was yet to be convinced by her son and wife. One afternoon, as everyone was celebrating the twins' 5th birthday, Daniel was mistaken pushed from the staircase while the children were dancing. The joyous birthday celebration became a chaos as David and Onye rushed Daniel to the hospital. After the doctor stabilized Daniel, he broke the news that a blood transfusion would be needed from either the mother or the father as fast as possible. David and Onye looked at each other, confused on what next to do. Mrs. Daniel brought them back to reality with a question: "Didn't you hear what the doctor said? We don't have time, please both of you should go and run the test, let's see whose blood will match." David and Onye was dumbfounded. They stood up and sluggishly followed the doctor. After a few minutes, the doctor asked them to stay in the reception while he attended to their son. While waiting at the reception, Mrs. Daniel could sense the weirdness between the couples. She asked them several times if they were okay, and their answers were positive. She assumed they were feeling bad because of their son's situation. After 4 hours that felt like 4 years, the doctor came to tell them that their son is perfectly fine and he just needed some rest before they can discharge him the next day. Onye curiously asked, "Doctor, please, whose blood did you use?" The doctor told her that her husband's blood matched, so his blood was used. As they walked to meet Daniel, Onye's mind was racing with questions. She was curious but couldn't say a word to her husband because of Mrs. Daniel. But, as they sat down looking at their son on the hospital bed with silence, Daniel decided to confess the truth to his wife and mother. Unable to bear the strain of his wife's feeling, he revealed that he was tired of the constant pressure and mockery his wife was facing from his mother because she couldn't give birth. And, when his mother started persuading him to get another woman pregnant, he decided to visit the hospital to make inquiries about surrogacy, and when he found out that he can father a child without hurting his wife, he decided to pay for a surrogate. When the twins arrived, he planned with the surrogate to leave the babies that very day in the bush just to attract Onye's attention. He went ahead to tell Onye that he was around the bush and that was why he came to meet her very fast. Daniel apologized to Onye for keeping the process hidden from her because he just wanted her to have children of her own without feeling bad. He had done this to protect Onye from his mother's constant torment. Onye was shocked but also relieved because she had loved the babies from the moment she found them in the bush, and the thought of losing them was unbearable. She was grateful to David for his sacrifice. Mrs. Daniels was initially furious for being deceived, but as she imagined how she pressured Onye to give her grandchildren and how she watched Onye take care of the babies in all these years, she began to soften. She realized that her obsession with having a grandchild had caused her to lose sight of what truly mattered, which was the happiness of her son and daughter-in-law. Over time, Mrs. Daniels came to accept the babies as her grandchildren. She watched as Onye nurtured and loved them, and her heart filled with warmth. The once strained relationship between Onye and her mother-in-law began to mend. Onye and David continued to raise the twins with love and care. They showered the children with affection, providing them with a stable and loving home. The babies thrived under their care, growing into happy and healthy children. 3 years later, Onye became pregnant. It was like a dream come true for her husband, but for her and everyone who doesn't know the secret in their family, it was a double blessing. Her husband and Mrs. Daniel treated her like an egg throughout the 9 months journey and, to the delight of the entire family, she gave birth to twin boys. The joy and celebration that filled the house was a far cry from the years of heartache and disappointment. The birth of the twins marked a new chapter in the lives of Onye, David, and Mrs. Daniels. The family was finally complete, united by love and a shared sense of purpose. The once strained relationship between Onye and her mother-in-law had blossomed into one of mutual respect and affection. Mrs. Daniels took great joy in spending time with her grandchildren. She would often tell stories of her own childhood, sharing laughter and wisdom with the young family. The double twins, now older, adored their grandmother, and their bond was a source of immense happiness for everyone. As the years went by, the family continued to grow and succeed. The first twins had grown into young adults, and the second twins was now a teenager. Mrs. Daniels, though now in her early 80s, remained a beloved member of the family. Every year, the family would gather for a special holiday celebration. They would decorate the house, cook traditional meals, and exchange gifts. These gatherings were a cherished tradition, a time for family, laughter, and love. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Onye announced a piece of exciting news. She was pregnant again, this time with a single child. The family was overjoyed, and Mrs. Daniels couldn't contain her excitement. She had always dreamed of having another grandchild. 9 months later, Onye gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The family welcomed the newborn with open arms, and Mrs. Daniels was overjoyed to become a grandmother once again. The new addition to the family brought renewed joy and excitement to their lives. I pray the Lord bless all expecting mothers with the fruit of the womb and put the mockery, pressure and devil into shame. Like and subscribe for more interesting and educational videos like this. Thank you.